Guys, we're back a little late. Indie Spotlight, we're 6 minutes late. I don't love it, but it is what it is. So we are back now with the Indie Spotlight. Tonight we're going to talk about, we're still doing 2010 movies. Last time we did a 14 movie called Under the Skin, which got me in a lot of trouble with a lot of people, but regardless. Tonight we're going to do a movie called Pounds. LBS is the way the title goes. It's back to 2010. We were, throughout most of the year, we've been examining movies from 5 years ago, indies from 5 years ago, recommending them to you, 2010. Before we go further, I'm Jonathan Betzler. You see my Twitter handle right here. Here's one of my compadres, Dave Joseph. See his Twitter handle right there. How you doing, Davey?
Doing well.
We got to shake off Star Wars and talk about an indie from 2010. You ready?
You bet.
And my other colleague, Davey, J Money.
Davey Joe.
Sorry.
Hello.
I'm still scattered from the Star Wars chat.
I'm sorry. Yeah, no, I'm excited.
Happy holidays, J Money.
Oh, thank you. I hope that you enjoy the overall effect behind me here. I'd like to point out some special things happening. Maybe over in this area, over here. There's a lot of butts on my tree, JB, and I just want people to be aware of that.
I see.
People to know
Is that a real tree, by the way?
Oh, yeah, that's a real tree. It's a real tree that I go and I get in the forests of Vermont, and I cut down myself, and I haul it back to my apartment.
Anyway, so for those of you that
completely uninterested.
For those of you that were interested in our trivia question that we posted on our Facebook, and do we put it on Twitter as well, J Money?
I believe we did.
Okay, so Twitter and Facebook, we put the trivia question that two of the stars of our indie tonight were also featured in the band in Hedwig and the Angry Inch, and they are Michael Aronoff and Miriam Shore, who are two the secondary leads in this movie. It's probably 2 and 3 on the call sheet, respectively, and they were both in the band in Hedwig and the Angry Inch, the film from 2001. So that's the answer to that trivia question.
Interesting.
Is it?
It kind of is. I hadn't really made the connection at all. I mean, I certainly didn't know the answer until you just told me now. So.
Well, I mean,
I
think Michael Aronoff got cast in this first, and then his friendship with Miriam Shore got her involved. Regardless, let's talk about Pounds. So Neil, this is Neil. He's an overweight guy and living in Brooklyn. He has an eating disorder, and he lives with his loving but also enabling family. And an episode of overeating leads to a metal episode, which leads to a potential near accident, which is the catalyst of him starting his journey of trying to kick his eating habit and lose the titular pounds. So I'm recommending this movie. This was my idea. I saw it as part of the Indie Spirit Award nominations in 2010. This is a much lower budget movie than a lot of the ones we've talked about, but I enjoyed it because for all its smallness, for lack of a better word, it is very sweet and earnest. I think endearing. It's a personal struggle, and we can talk about there's some flaws that I'm sure we'll get into. Some of which were created by or were a product of its budget. Some of which were just some rookie mistakes that we can talk about. So I'd seen it before. I recommended it to these guys. Made these guys watch it on Hulu. It's available on Hulu now for those of you that are interested to follow along. Stop this video, go watch it, and come back and watch it at the end of our discussion. Just kidding, keep watching us. J Money, your thoughts first.
I really enjoyed this movie, so I'm glad that we got a chance to see it. I certainly knew nothing about it ahead of time, so it was a delight.
All right, and Davey Joe.
I liked the movie. The performances were, I thought, something special.
Well, I'm glad you said that because that was the first thing on my notes. I think that's the key to the movie is the engaging leads. They're a little rough around the edges performance-wise.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sorry, Jim, I cut you off, or you cut me off, but go ahead.
I was just agreeing with you. I think the first few minutes into the film, I was really unsure of how it was going to go because we were dealing with some really outsized, almost caricaturesque, characters. But it really redeemed itself over the course as we got to see their development, and I guess that's what you're probably about to say, JB.
Yeah, I mean, I think the supporting actors struggle a little bit, and the 3 leads are probably just more seasoned. and they were probably working for free. And it just showed. And like we talked about with Star Wars, and like we talked about like if all the performances are good, and like that is a solid director who's keeping everybody along that same vision. And this is I think maybe one of the flaws we talked about that's not a budgetary one is like a stronger director, and I have a lot of good things I want to talk about this particular director who's his name is slipping my mind.
It's Matthew Bonifacio. Matthew Bonifacio.
Yes, Bonifacio. Matthew Bonifacio. But I mean, like, he was not able to get some of those supporting characters. I don't know if you want me to name names or not, but he was not able to get them, in line or really make them believable. Which I think when the movie heads upstate is when it really flies, when it really starts to focus on the 2 to 3 leads, and they really get to have some time to develop their characters. What do you guys think about that, Davey?
Yeah, I think that you're absolutely right. I think it's some of the characters on the periphery in the city maybe were a little weaker in the performances, but not horrible. But you're absolutely right. 3 main leads are great.
You actually used the phrase "something special." Do you want to expound upon that?
Yeah, I mean, I thought that the performances really got me, and I think that for the lead character, this kind of really hit close to home. So he just kind of let his heart show. He wore his heart on his sleeve, and it just had to be taxing for him. I mean, it just had to be. It had to take something out of him.
I have a story to tell about that. Do you want me to save it to the end, or should I talk about that now?
Go for it.
So after the screening, there, obviously, and this is a movie that's 5 years old, so we can give. Should we give away part of it?
I think that's fine.
Okay, I think it's okay.
It's nearly 6 years old. I mean, actually, it was even shot in 2004, so part of it's 10 years old.
Right.
But, it was, he does lose some weight, and by the end of the movie, he loses a great deal of weight, which the actor did in real life, and he was actually a lot heavier, the actor, than the number they use in the film in real life, and so he lost even more than they suggested.
Wow.
And I think what this underscores, and I think if Carmine Familietta were here right now, he would say this because we had a Q&A. He came in and he'd gained it all back. So, I think that underscores the struggle of eating disorders, and how challenging it can be. So anyway, so that was my story about that. I wanted to talk about the direction because I dinged it a little bit with the performances, and let me start at some other things that some other rookie mistakes before I get to the good stuff, because we've already talked about how sort of the awkwardness of some of the performances. There were some other things, like there were some awkward, clunky choices, like one that that off-tone choices, like for example the shot where everybody's head leans in when he first tries to eat a healthy food. If you remember, like a very almost childish type shot choice. There's a lot of those little moments, and also, like it's common in independent films to have not enough background, and I've done enough of these films where it's not really a good excuse. Obviously, you can't pay them very well. It just takes a little, but it takes a little more effort to get people in the seats. Any scene that was in a public place had no background and felt really empty, and that's like that and Double Shadow are things that are an earmark of just like sloppy independent filmmaking. Like that's not like their excuse might be a budgetary thing, but I personally know for a fact that it can be done. You can get people there. You just have to make the effort, and it's important to fill those spaces up and to make them feel real.
I mean, I guess for me, the only time I actually really noticed what you're talking about is in the scene towards the end where he's in a restaurant. But on a whole, because it looked so familiar and because it looked genuine to the environment that I'm used to seeing, and for that context, it really wasn't noticeable. I mean, I'm assuming it was either shot around Coney Island or
it's
the characters.
It's shot in Brooklyn, but it was possible that maybe I'm just a little more sensitive to it.
It's possible.
No question.
But I mean, like I do think it could have been stronger in that regard. I have some lot of good things to say, though. Go ahead.
Well, I would say that the emptiness of that lent itself pretty well to a lot of other parts of the film in general. So I think the director maybe made some good decisions about where the story was going.
Well, I mean, I disagree with that. I think the emptiness of the upstate area needed to be contrasted more with filling up a lot of those other areas.
That's a really good point.
Well, I disagree with you about that, but we can get into it later.
Do you disagree with me about that?
Yeah, only because I think that it really helped emphasize the loneliness and the struggle that Neil was going through in those areas. And I also feel like, as much as we were talking about him in a very urban environment, supposedly, I really feel like it was about him feeling like an outsider in a lot of ways. So,
but all the more reason to put more people in that room. I mean, that's the goal. If you want to make him feel an outsider amongst people, then you put a lot of people in those spaces and make him feel alone in those spaces with the camera work and everything else. I mean, and that's how you accomplish that. By putting him in an empty space, I don't think that accentuates that at all. I think it just looks empty. And
but I think that they were trying
it also takes you out of the moment because it doesn't feel like you're in a real place. It feels like you're in a movie set where they couldn't get enough extras.
Absolutely. This was a labor of love, and it showed, but also it was a labor of love. On the other hand, I think that it was interesting to show a certain aspect of Brooklyn culture, of a certain class system, where I've seen restaurants like that in this environment, and I also have seen, environments that were similar where it's just it's a little more awkward, it's a little emptier. These are not like fashion hotspots. These are places where, a certain neighborhood type hangs out. They're not going to be filled. They're going to be relatively empty.
You're sweet to try and justify it. I do think that they would have put people there if they could. You know what I mean? I'm sure the director would have wanted to fill it up more. In fact, I have some inside track on that as well. So it's appreciated you're trying to justify it, but I mean, I don't think it was I think it was more of a choice of necessity than anything else.
Well, that's fair. For me, it did not detract. Is all I'm trying to get to.
Okay, fair enough. And I mean, it's definitely a pet peeve of mine. So I mean, I acknowledge the potential of me being hypersensitive to it. I've got some good things to talk about, about the direction. Some very promising things about Bonifacio as a director. Before I do that, do you have any others? And these are minor complaints that I'm talking about. But do you have any other minor complaints, Davey, that you want to add to that?
Yeah, I do. I have. One thing, the scene where he goes on the date in the city after he's lost the weight, that conversation was not written well. I
have a whole other notes about the writing, but yeah, go ahead.
I just think that the pivot, in one breath she's like, I don't know why you never asked me out before, and then she looks at the overweight guy and starts talking about how disgusting he is. It just seems to me that there's no way that you can do that in the next breath. You got to be a little bit more subtle. It needs to be something that she says, not necessarily conscious of what it is she's saying, instead of being so overt.
I want to put a pin in that, if that's okay. I agree with you, but I want to put a pin in it because I've got some information later.
Okay.
So I'm going to talk about some good directorial things. I'm going to try and do it quickly because I want to talk about what David Joe is just talking about. Some things that I thought really worked, some interesting choices that I thought really worked in this film include the flashbacks and fantasies. Especially when that scene where he's talking to himself when he's upstate, when he's on a talk show type stuff. All that stuff I thought worked really, really well in getting at his frame of mind. I thought the revelation of the lost weight, because they have a major time jump in this film, and when I saw it in the theater, there was an audible gasp when it was finally revealed, and that was a nice build-up, well done there, because that's hard to do, to sort of get that sort of reaction. So the audience was well manipulated there. I also think the tone was, one of the things that we've talked about episode after episode is, one of the director's chief jobs is to maintain tone, and I think this film did a really good job of that. I thought it was well paced. It wasn't rushed, but it never felt like it dragged. And the shot selection and the blocking seemed to both match the spirit of the film, and those are some hard directorial things that a lot of young directors can't do and don't know how to do, that this film does very well. At least that's my opinion. Where do you guys stand on that sort of stuff? Let's start with Davey.
No, I agree. I agree with that. It definitely, there was they could have really gone down the wrong road. They could have done some kind of crazy Rocky montage kind of thing,
Absolutely.
and it would have sucked. And they didn't,
Yep.
and they kept that same feel, and it really worked.
J Money.
Yeah. I mean, I just want to echo what Davey Joe just said. I think that you nailed it when you said the tone of this was kind of well paced out and well maintained. Because, like I was saying at the beginning, I was concerned initially the first 10 minutes in this film that it was going to be played for laughs to some degree. It wasn't necessarily going to be, so much about the guy's struggle as much as a lighthearted film about a guy going through some changes. It ended up not being that. It ended up being much more surprisingly sort of internalized, and it ended up being a lot more substantial than that. So, and I'm not afraid to say that I really actually connect with a lot of the concerns in this movie about weight, and certainly in my life in general. So there's a lot of things that I felt were very honest about what the character was going through, and I know that Carmine was also one of the writers, I believe, of this film, right?
Oh yeah.
So I felt like there was a lot of his own personal struggle that was definitely well represented in this film that I kind of ended up appreciating. That's a tone that carries out throughout. That's a tone. There's an internal process, and also as he sort of tries to resolve him being reinserted back into society at the end of it. It doesn't really actually ever go anywhere that you might expect this kind of film to go. It doesn't really end in very neatly tied up packages that you might expect. So I appreciated that about it.
Well, you said it hit a nerve, and also you guys were making fun of my weight before we went on, maybe this movie can inspire us. Should we start the NNCS LBS challenge? Should we next time announce a starting weight and work on losing weight all through? Because I mean, Davey, you could stand to lose a few too. Don't be looking smug over there.
That's fine.
What do you guys think? Do you want to announce this right now, the LBS challenge?
I'm fine with that. We can do it, but not until after New Year's.
You got after New Year's. You guys are welcome to take it, but I've gone through this process plenty of times in my own personal way, so I'm going to bow out.
So,
Thank you very much.
Fair enough. Sorry, I didn't mean to put you on the spot. It just seemed like a fun idea. But regardless, I do have a surprise for you guys. In rewatching the credits of this movie, I saw that I knew somebody that worked on it. So I sent him a quick email and asked him for some thoughts and notes. And here's what he was a camera assistant on the pickups after principal photography. So after Carmine had lost a lot of the weight, so scenes that he worked on was back in the Brooklyn. He worked on that scene that we were talking about, Davey, in the restaurant. In fact, my buddy was actually was one of the few people in the background of that scene. And this is my buddy TJ that I want to give a quick shout out to. I appreciate him getting back to me. He had a great experience working on the film. He said Carmine's stories are personal, and he didn't really talk about how hard it must have been to keep the film going. Let's see. So for the date scene, I guess Carmine had a real hard time filming it because the words were verbatim from a real date that he had.
Oh wow!
So he had a real hard time with it, and it had an effect on his character, but he had a hard time filming it. It was a devastating moment on his own life. And for you nerds out there, you camera nerds, I can tell you that the film was shot on 16mm, the RE Super 16mm, the SR3, and the Super CDs package. It was like back in the heyday of the Super 16 indie features, because film stocks had advanced to the point where their grain structure, that the grain of the new 16 stocks looked tighter than even some of the older 35mm stocks, allowing making breakthroughs in ASAs that allowed DPs to work with less lights on smaller projects. So anyway, that's what I mean. I'm sort of summarizing here. He sent me a long email, but I'm trying to, for time purposes, summarize it. But that's what he had to say about that. I don't know, guys, that any of that was interest to you.
It definitely is.
Yeah, of course.
He did offer to get in touch with Carmine and offer him up for an interview later on down the line. I wasn't sure how you guys felt about the movie yet, so I certainly wanted to wait. But it sounds like
amazing.
So it sounds like we can pull that off if that's something you want to do. Apparently, he's very open, and in doing some research, in looking for photos for the film, I saw that he had done several other interviews on similar type shows to ours. Not that there's any better show than ours, but you guys know.
No, honestly, after I watched this movie, I looked him up on IMDb to see what else he had done, and I'm very curious about his other work. So that'd be great. I would certainly love to preview any of his other work as well. So
they did something, according to TJ, they did something called a Mexicano,
which had a lot of the same actors in it, apparently.
Yeah, Michael Aronov is in it as well. Yeah. And apparently he gives another powerful performance, according to TJ. But it's interesting, though. I do want to make the point that Davie didn't like that wedding scene. Not the wedding scene. I didn't like the wedding scene, but Davie didn't like that date scene, even though it was true to life. And it is, and like there is something to be said for, regardless if something is true to you as a writer, you still need to make it dramatically. Still need to dramatize it in a believable way, regardless of what really happened. You have to step back and look at that scene, and if it did not sound like it felt natural to Davie, I don't think he's necessarily off there. And now, even though that I know that it's a true story, if I was on that set and I was either directing or assistant directing, and they said that to me, and I was giving notes, I would be like, that doesn't matter. You know what I mean? Like, I don't care what really happened. What cares is what's going to resonate with an audience. And if an audience isn't going to buy it, regardless of really, because sometimes, truth is stranger than fiction, as they say, but still, the fiction needs to feel believable for an audience to really have that impact, and that was a missed opportunity there in that regard. So I agree with David Joe, and I wanted to make that point.
I think that it was a great point that came across, and how horrible things like that could happen. They definitely happen all the time. It just could have been a little bit more believable. Just it was too sharp of a pivot from one breath to the next breath.
Yeah, we need to go for sure. But I do want to say thanks to these guys for talking about pounds. It was a good discussion. I'm glad you guys both like the film very much. That means a lot to me, and also the micro budget film community. Next time we're going to do a slightly larger independent film, and it's a very strange film that we're going to talk about next time, and this is going to be January 6th at 8:30 Eastern, 5:30 Pacific. That's a Wednesday, and I'm not going to reveal the film now, but I can give you the trivia is one of our previous indies is discussed heavily in this indie. Should I tell what the indie is that's discussed, or would that give me too much?
No, say it.
Greenberg, the previous indie we discussed, is discussed heavily in our next time's indie.
Really?
So that is your little trivia. But we're going to start late again, but in about 6 minutes, I bet, about 9:05 or 9:06 Eastern, we are going to do our classic of the night, and we're getting all Christmasified. Time for Miracle on 34th Street is our classic. I'm yelling again. Time for Miracle on 34th Street is our classic of the week, and that's coming up right next here in No Name Cinema Society. We'll see you shortly.